Some stories never make the headlines, some victims remain nameless, and some mysteries fade before they're ever solved. If you're drawn to the strange and unexplained, from cryptids and aliens to hauntings, true crime, and everything in between, you need to check out Unknown, Unsolved, Unseen. Hosted by Frank and Sage, this podcast dives into a plethora of unexplained phenomena. They research, discuss, and share their own opinions on stories that linger in the shadows, from the unsolved to the unbelievable. Listen to Unknown, Unsolved, Unseen wherever you get your podcasts, because every story, no matter how strange, deserves to be told.
Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that Down the Crooked Path is researched and recorded in Niagara Falls, Ontario, on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Attawandaron, and the Mississauga of Credit First. This land has been home to Indigenous peoples for thousands of years, and we recognize their enduring connection. We are grateful to share these stories on their lands that carry their histories, and we encourage our listeners to reflect on the past, present, and future of the land they call home. Welcome, wanderers, to Journey Down the Crooked Path, a place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow.
Across history, the afterlife has been shaped by whatever a community believed would happen next. Some expected judgment, others expected reunion, many expected a journey. For example, there are customs that surround burying the dead with coins to pay safe passage to the underworld or afterlife. And even if those beliefs don't match modern systems, the idea of a passage still shows up in the way we treat the dead. Bodies are prepared, transported, and delivered with the expectation that they are headed towards a final destination. Families trust that the route is direct. They trust that the person they loved is exactly where they're supposed to be. But there are cases where that journey goes off course. A body can be sent to the wrong facility, or a label can be misplaced. A casket can be routed through the wrong channels. So what happens when a person's final trip doesn't unfold the way it was planned to? That's what makes the story of Coughlin's coffin so bewildering. The path it followed is almost too unbelievable. To the point, with each step of its travel, the details grew stranger and harder to reconcile with what anyone expected. The story, or at this point it might be best to refer to it as a legend, begins with the confusion of facts. Charles Francis Coughlin was born to Francis Coughlin of Dublin, Ireland, and Amy Ruley, born of Jersey, one of the Channel Islands. While Charles's birthplace is recorded as being Paris, France on June 11, 1845, there is a lot of mixed belief that challenges this. There are some who will tell you that he was born in Ireland, but most will argue that this is a confusion with his father. The mix-up makes sense when you look at the history connected to the name. Ireland carries a long association with immigration and loss, especially considering the era of Coffin ships. These were vessels that carried Irish families across the Atlantic during the famine years. They earned the name Coffin ship because the conditions on board were so poor that many of the passengers didn't survive the crossing. Passengers who died during this voyage were usually buried at sea. Records from this period describe bodies being taken over the side and released into the water because there was no space for them on board. The mortality rates on some of these crossings were high enough that the nickname stayed attached to the ships long after the famine ended. And perhaps the idea of coffin ships has contributed to the ideas behind this very weird story that I'm about to tell you. In some storytellers' versions, Charles was born in Prince Edward Island, Canada, specifically a spot called Bell's Cape near Bay Fortune. While Charles did spend a considerable amount of time here, it wasn't his birthplace. Some accounts will say he spent his childhood here, even was baptized in one of the churches. But he did spend many summers here, to the point where he actually purchased a summer home and farm, planning for it to be his retirement home. He had referred to his farm and the island many times as being his piece away from the world. Early in life, his parents were grooming him to become a lawyer. His father moved in certain social circles and was even friends with Charles Dickens, so they had certain societal expectations of Charles. But Charles had ambitions of his own. He wanted to act. He began performing in 1859 with the Sadler's Well Theatre Summer Tour. His early years were spent taking up supporting roles in London, but in 1868, he was performing major roles like Charles Surface in School for Scandal and Sir Oscar in Life for Life at the Prince of Wales Theatre. He stayed with the Prince of Wales Company for 7 or 8 seasons, and his reputation grew enough that in 1876, a man named Augustine, an influential American theater manager, brought him to the United States, and he remained in the States, summering in PEI Canada for the rest of his life. An American critic described him as an actor who completely and perfectly forgot himself in his performances, noting that he avoided showy tricks or self-promotion and focused entirely on the character that he was portraying. His personal life was more complicated. He married the sculptor Coonan Beveridge at the age of 51, but he also had a long-term common-law partner of 25 years, which led to public scandal when the truth surfaced, and Beveridge divorced him a year later. He declared bankruptcy in 1890 as well. Charles Coughlin had made a name for himself professionally on both sides of the Atlantic. His schedule was full, and he was working steadily enough that he rarely stayed in any one place for too long. Now, the word is still out on whether or not this next part of the story is actually true, or if it was added on over the years for dramatic effect. But legend tells that he visited a fortune teller. At the time, spiritualism, which is the belief that the dead have the means to communicate with the living, was pretty popular in the States. The Fox sisters and other mediums were traveling the country and performing seances. So Charles, he visits a fortune teller, and she tells him that, yes, you will be famous, but that he is going to die at the height of his fame in a southern U.S. city, and that he would have no rest until he returned home. That last bit didn't really make a whole lot of sense, so Charles just brushes off the whole encounter entirely. Charles has now been traveling with his troupe, performing one of his own works, The Royal Box, when he arrives in Galveston, Texas on October 30th, 1899. He suddenly becomes extremely sick, with what doctors at the time diagnosed as acute gastritis. After about 4 weeks of rest, he relapses in pain and dies in bed at the Tremont Hotel on November 27th of that same year. So far, the fortune teller's prediction is right. He does die in a southern state in the United States. His body is taken to the Levy Brothers Funeral Home. Now, his current partner at the time is by his side when he dies, in this strange, unfamiliar city with no friends or family, trying to make arrangements for his body. And she knew that Charles wanted to be cremated and buried in New York. The problem was that Galveston didn't have a crematory at the time. Here enters even more confusion about the truth, because it's believed that the grieving widow has arranged for his body to be sent to St. Louis, where they did have a crematory. But many of Charles' friends and family members were insisting that instead his body be taken back to New York immediately and cremated there. Both her funds and her energy are exhausted, so she has his remains placed in a temporary receiving vault at the Lakeside Cemetery until she could figure everything out. Sadly, before she could set anything into place, disaster strikes. In September of 1900, a huge hurricane hits Galveston. It's one of the deadliest natural disasters in U.S. history. The storm reached winds about 140 miles per hour, and a huge storm surge rose well over the highest points of the island. Galveston had a population of fewer than 40,000 people at the time, and the storm destroyed thousands of homes and left an estimated 6,000 to 12,000 people dead. Buildings collapsed, ships were carried inland, and debris covered entire neighborhoods. Cemeteries were hit hard, vaults were damaged, and coffins were pulled from their resting place and carried into the floodwater. Newspapers reported that some caskets were recovered and reburied, while others were never found. And one of those coffins just happened to be Charles Coughlin's.
You. Yeah, you. Still haunting the same old fast fashion? Time to dig up something better with Back from the Dead Goods, a Canadian small business where forgotten threads get a second life and sustainability meets spooky. This isn't just upcycled clothing, it's resurrected fashion with an eerie edge. Handpicked, reworked, and revived, every piece is as unique as a ghost story whispered at midnight. And because you're a part of the Canadian Creepies family, you get an exclusive deal. Use code Canadian Creepies at checkout for 10% off. Find them lurking on Instagram, Etsy, and Poshmark. Links are in the episode description. Give your wardrobe a second chance at life, if you dare. Looking for your next obsession? The Creators Collective Podcasts is your gateway to the dark, the chilling, and the downright fascinating. We're a community of independent podcasts with one goal: to share the best in true crime, paranormal tales, folklore, and unexplained mysteries. Whether you crave cold cases that won't stay closed, haunted histories that refuse to be forgotten, or stories that make you sleep with the lights on, there's a show waiting for you in the collective. And when you join us, you're not just listening to one podcast, you're stepping into a world of creators who love this stuff as much as you do. Check out the Creators Collective today. Follow the link in our show notes to discover your next favorite podcast. We'll be waiting for you. Let's take a moment during this break to talk about something that matters. Something that doesn't get to be background noise. The Anishinaabe-Moan word, Nikinagana, means we are all related, and we are. But relationship isn't just about words, it's about responsibility. Canadian author Naomi Klein once said, "It is not enough to say that we live on Indigenous land. We have to act as if we do." And one way to do that is by supporting Pay Your Rent, a grassroots mutual aid initiative that offers direct material support to Indigenous organizers across this land. It's not charity, it's rent. For those of us who aren't Indigenous to this place, it's a way to show up differently, to redistribute some of what's been taken. The Pay Your Rent Fund started as a one-time request for help in 2018 and grew into a nonprofit called Nikinagana. Your monthly or one-time donation can help provide food, hygiene supplies, housing support, and resources for Indigenous-led resistance and community care. So if you've ever said, "We're all related," ask yourself, are you being a good relative? Visit payyourrent.ca and find out more about how you can be part of something better. Now, back to this case.
Despite many search efforts, the coffin remained missing. Weeks went by, then months, and then months turned into years. 8 years later, fishermen in Bay Fortune, PEI saw something strange tangled up in their nets: a badly damaged coffin. On the coffin was a nameplate. They scrape off the barnacles to reveal the name, which read Charles Coughlin. His casket had been carried by the current from the Gulf of Mexico up the eastern seaboard and stopped nearby his most favorite place on Earth, a place that he had planned his retirement. He was home. From here, it's said that his coffin is taken to the same church where he was baptized in 1841 and buried in the churchyard. And this kind of falls in line with exactly what this fortune teller told him. His body wouldn't rest until he's home. So his coffin is found in PEI, Canada, 8 years after it's carried out to sea. But Charles Coughlin's daughter Gertrude, she spent 27 years searching for that coffin. She and her husband had hired people to look for any sort of trace of it, but they never received a single lead. Then, in 1927, Gertrude is reading the Evening Post when she comes across a Believe It or Not article by Robert Ripley. Yes, that Ripley's Believe It or Not. It read,
Charles Coughlin comes home. He died in 1899 and was buried in Galveston. When the tragic flood came, his coffin was washed out to sea, and the Gulf Stream carried him around Florida and up the coast to Prince Edward Island, 2,000 miles distant where he was born.
This was the first time in nearly 3 decades that Gertrude had heard anything about her father's body being recovered. So she shows the article to her husband, and together they contact the newspaper to ask Ripley, hey, where did you hear this from? And he tells them that he heard the account from Sir Johnson Forbes Robertson and Lily Lagarty, who had been friends of her father's. Charles' sister Rose is so upset by the article that she asked Ripley for a redaction, which, of course, never happened. Today, Ripley's Believe It or Not is far more accurate and does a lot more fact-checking than has been done in the past. Robert Ripley himself was just one man, and he operated as both an entertainer and a reporter. So some of his entries were based on well-documented circumstances, and others were based on anecdotes that were never checked. As long as it made for a good story, well, that was good enough for Robert Ripley. Today, the franchise has editors and museum curators, so that alone raises the accuracy baseline. But when it comes to the story of how Coughlin's coffin arrived in Prince Edward Island, well, Ripley didn't have anything to back what he printed. We currently don't have anything to support that what he was told even came from Robertson or Lagarty. So Gertrude calls officials in PEI to verify this. Are there any burial records that match the story? And authorities in Prince Edward Island tell her that there are no documents of a casket being recovered from the water, and there are no records of burials that have any connection to her father's name. From here, the tale says that after hearing from the people over in Galveston, Gertrude is told that her father was never recovered or reinterred there. With her only clue about her father's remains ever being connected to PEI, she goes down there herself to check sometime in the 1980s. But this is just another weird part of this story because in 1952, Gertrude died. And while the most circulated account of Coughlin's coffin says it was found and reburied in Prince Edward Island, there are some less talked about versions of what really happened to his coffin. Some early 20th century reports claim that several metal caskets were recovered in the weeks after the hurricane. A few were said to have washed up on beaches outside of the city limits, and it's said that one of those coffins was Coughlin's. But there's nothing to verify this either. Another explanation came from the people involved in the cleanup. They described large sections of the cemetery vaults collapsing into the water. Some caskets were believed to have dropped into deeper channels and become trapped under rubble, silt, and structural remains. This was considered likely for many of the missing burials. And this is pretty plausible because there is in fact water under the city, as the city itself sits on sand and not bedrock. The water table is extremely high, so even if you dig just a few feet deep, you'll hit water. This is why the cemeteries here bury their dead in vaults above ground or in raised plots, and why it was so easy for them to have been destroyed during the 1900 hurricane. In a later retelling, it is suggested that Coughlin's metal coffin didn't drift thousands of miles to PEI. Instead, it was found in a marshy inlet, somewhere along the Gulf of Mexico, most likely Louisiana or eastern Texas. It's said that the storm had actually carried his coffin inland and not out to sea, and that it was discovered by fishermen or hunter. Yet again, there is nothing to verify this telling of either tale. It's like a massive game of telephone, and nearly every detail of the story got jumbled as it was passed along. As for Prince Edward Island and how that location got tangled up in the story, it seems like the details just were an embellishment of his summer property near Bay Fortune, and it seems like a natural place for this legend to sort of settle. Historical records of the province do not show any burials connected to Coughlin. Local archives, church records, and cemetery logs contain no entry for a recovered metal casket or a burial under his name. Over the years, researchers have reviewed the island's records and have never found any sort of documentation to support this claim. And yet, even without records, the story is circulated among residents. It's told as fact in tourist conversations, while most islanders consider it a piece of lore. People like the idea of a man who spent his summers there returning after dead, after a fortune teller refers to him returning home. It's impossible to say where Charles Coughlin's final resting place currently is. I mean, it's actually impossible to say for sure where he was even originally buried. There is a lot of speculation that because there was so much back and forth and lack of decision with his arrangements, that it's possible his partner had his body sent to New York right away instead of having it interned in Galveston. And we'll never know for sure because in 1979, a fire broke out at the Levy brothers' funeral home, a result of arson. The blaze caused over $1 million in damages, and sadly, that included the destruction of the home's historical records. And this is one of the reasons why the details of his interment and recovery are so murky. None of the many versions of this tale actually explain what happened to Coughlin's coffin. It's most likely that his coffin has never been found. Death leaves gaps that people try to fill, and the unknown has a way of pulling in whatever a community remembers about someone. When it comes to what happens in death is unknown, but maybe the fortune teller was right, and wherever Coughlin is now, he is home.